morning, everybody. This is Belinda Cromer. I'm a Smith County Master Gardener, and I would like to welcome you to our 2021 Smith County Master Gardener Library Series. COVID-19 restrictions and conditions have changed our way of presenting this year. We're doing this series by Zoom only, and this is our second program in the series with Andie Rathbone presenting today, Fixin to Garden in Texas, and the last series will be May 21st. And that one will be Woodpeckers of East Texas, and it will be given by our own AgriLife horticulturist, Greg Grant. And we hope that you will be able to join us for the May program, and we thank you very much for joining us today. Hopefully in 2022, we'll be able to have our in-person programs at the Tyler Public Library Auditorium as we have in the past years. We want to thank the Tyler Public Library for sponsoring and supporting our library series. And I'd like to give a special plug for an event coming up next week for Earth Day on Tuesday, April 20th. We are partnering with the Tyler Library to give away 50 kits for planting and caring for plants. The Tyler Library Adult Program is an awesome, wonderful program, and we in this community are very blessed to have this facility and the staff that maintains it. So we thank them very much for all they do for our community. And I just want to share with you a few minutes, a little bit about our Smith County Master Gardener program. We are a part of the Texas AgriLife Extension Service, and our group is specifically trained to provide horticulture information, help, and education to the people of Smith County through the Smith County Extension Service office. Our members go through a 72-hour variety of horticulture-related education, including hands-on training, and we spend lots of hours in a year-long internship to prepare us to serve this community. The classes are normally held in the beginning of the year, the first 3 months of the year, with the internship to follow for the next 12 months. This year is again a little bit different due to COVID-19. Our classes for this year will start in June and go through August, with the internship to follow that class. The details for the classes are announced in the Tyler paper and through social media in advance of the class. We also have information for them at our extension office in the Cotton Belt building in Tyler, and that's at the lower level of that building. And just to let you know, on May the 13th, we will have an orientation for this class at the Cotton Belt building from 1 to 3 p.m. This is a really rewarding organization filled with people who love horticulture, nature, and just digging in the dirt. For anyone interested in seeing our local work, the volunteer stuff we do for Tyler, you can visit the Tyler Botanical Gardens located in the Tyler Rose Garden. We maintain those gardens for the city of Tyler, and we are all very happy volunteers. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Andie Rathbone. This is a very talented gardener who didn't start her gardening as a Texas gardener, but certainly has mastered it by now. Andie grew up in Illinois, where her family owns a large farm in central Illinois, raising corn and soybeans. In 1972, she moved to St. Louis, where her interest in gardening was in her own backyard while she was taking courses at the Missouri Botanical Garden. It sounds like a really fun experience. She was transferred to Dallas, Texas in 1997, where she had to relearn her gardening because of our Texas crazy changing climate. Upon her retirement from AT&T in 2002, she moved to the most wonderful city in Texas, Tyler, and immediately began to pursue her interest in becoming a master gardener. She enrolled in the 10th class of the Smith County Master Gardeners and became a master gardener at the end of that time in 2004. Sorry about that. To nobody's surprise, Andie, who does everything, was named Master Gardener of the Year in 2005. She has served as the president of this organization twice in 2007 and 2008, and she has chaired many of our groups or committees in Smith County Master Gardens, including the garden tour, as well as the calendar and gardening guide, the Rose Garden docents, and the Speakers Bureau. But today she's in charge or an administrator for our Facebook page. And if you're not a member or haven't liked that page, it is really to your advantage. It's a really awesome resource for what's going on in gardening today, especially in our area. She does a fabulous job. In addition to Master Gardeners, Andie is also active in the Tyler League of Women Voters, the AAUW, and the Friends of Tyler Libraries. So before we get started, just a little housekeeping. If you'll keep your computers muted during the program, it will help us with echoes and reverbs and crazy interference and give us a much better listening environment. And if you have questions during the program, we invite you to put those in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat room, and at the end of her presentation, we will be trying to answer those questions for you. Andie, I'm sure Andie can handle that. So without any other information, I just want to say thank you, Andie, for giving your time today. I know it's precious, and I know it's a great program. Let's see here. Did it work? There we go.
There we go. Okay, slideshow. There we go. Okay. Okay. Thank you all who have come here today to listen to this talk on a super rainy day that we've all been, I know that I have been hoping for weeks now, because we really need the rain. So I'm going to sit here and take you through like my little journey when I learned that I was going to be fixing to garden in Texas. So there has been a huge inward migration to Texas in the past 10 years. We gotta go back. Past 10 years. From 2010 to 2019, over 2 million people moved to Texas. And Tyler itself, where we live, had an inward migration of almost 14,000 people, which increased Tyler's SMSA by 6.6%. In last year alone, there were 6 huge companies that relocated their operations to Texas. Oracle and Tesla moved to Austin. Hewlett-Packard and Murphy Oil moved to Houston, and Charles Schwab and McKesson Medical moved to Dallas. And this trend of corporations relocating into Texas is continuing into this year. So those kind of relocations move thousands of people into Texas, into the state. And lots of the people that move here like to garden, but a lot of them are not sure what to do. So I'm just going to share with you really briefly, this is my journey. I started out in Chicago, Illinois. That's where I was born and grew up. And both my parents are from Illinois. Like Belinda said in her intro, my father's side of the family is an 8,000 acre farm that started off as 2 sections of land that they bought as railroad land in 1845. So the farm has been in my family for 175 years. My mom's side of the family also comes from right around here in a little town called Rantoul, and they had a farm, but their farm was bought out in World War II for Chanute Air Force Base. So Illinois is probably, if people in Texas could have soil like they have in Illinois, they would have thought they had died and gone to heaven. Because Illinois is where the glaciers came, when the glaciers came down, they dropped all the nice black loamy topsoil. So in Illinois, you've got this wonderful black loamy topsoil, and it is about 2 feet deep. So there is like nothing you can't grow in the state of Illinois. I moved to St. Louis in 1972, and Missouri is where the glaciers stopped. They stopped like right around down here where the Ozarks stop. So down here, you have really rocky soil, but I was on the Mississippi River, and so all the areas that border the river have clay soil, but it's very rich alluvial clay soil, and it's slightly acidic. We grew really pretty rhododendrons there. And then again, I was transferred in 1997 to Dallas, and that's why we're having this talk, because that's why I had to learn how to garden in Texas. Now, when I lived in St. Louis, I gardened for about 15 years, and we had bought a house in the city, and I decided I really wanted to garden. So I had a friend who was an expert gardener, and she taught me a lot of things. I read books, I read magazines, and the Missouri Botanical Garden has a really good adult education program where you could take courses for they were like $25 or $35 a piece. So I took courses on perennials and bulbs and how to plant. And I also, when I started to be on the internet about 1995, I stumbled onto this website called the Garden Web, and it was full of forums for plant-specific forums, state-specific forums, and I started reading them. I started interacting with people on the forums, and I learned a lot about gardening and the different kinds of plants. So when I learned I was moving to Texas, some of the people on this website that I had met on the internet said, well, you need to buy Neil Sperry's book. And that was the old Neil Sperry's book with the cowboy boot on it. And another book that was recommended to me was a book called Native Texas Plants by a woman named Sally Wasowski. I know I'm not pronouncing that right, but, and she had her book based on the different ecological regions in Texas and how certain plants grow in certain of the different ecological regions. And that's where I thought, oh, this is going to be much different from where I've been living. So after I sort of studied those books, I realized that my favorite plants like lilacs, like peonies, and we'll get into peonies later on, tulips, and these big gigantic hostas that were 7 feet in diameter, they weren't going to really probably transfer to where I was going to move to well. So this is the state of Texas, and as you can see, there is a 10 different ecological regions in Texas. When I moved to when I moved to Dallas, I was in this like black, skinny region, and this is the Blackland Prairies. This is where you have that big, black, alkaline, gumbo clay soil. And when I first moved to Dallas, I did have my soil tested, and I found out that I had a soil pH of 8.5. And to compound how alkaline everything was going to be in Dallas, the water had a pH of 8. So anyone who lived in Dallas and said, oh, if you want blue hydrangeas, you just put like nails in the ground. Well, no, that wasn't going to work. So what I knew I was going to have to do was really amend the soil if I wanted to garden there. And the other thing that was going to be completely different was heat, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So here I am, here's my house in Dallas, and as a little treat for me on the proceeds of my house in St. Louis, I hired North Haven Gardens, and they did me a little garden plan, and they sent all these guys into my backyard, and they dug down about 8 inches and put in compost and organic matter. And then they laid the hardscape and they put in a couple of trees and my bushes. So that was something I really, it was essential to do. I don't even think I could have dealt with clay that was unamended. Now, when we talk about heat, this is the heat zone map. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the USDA's cold zone map, but this is something a little bit different. And this was developed by a president from the American Horticultural Society who decided that, you know, I don't think that our cold zones are telling the whole story, because we are in like zone 8. If we're in cold zone 8, well, this is also cold zone 8 all around here. And the plants that you can grow in those two different regions are very, very different. So what he did was he gathered 20 years of daily high temperatures from 7,800 weather stations in the United States and analyzed all this data, and what he came up with was 12 different heat zones based on the number of days in each zone where the average temperature was over 86 degrees. And he picked 86 degrees because it's at 86 degrees, those kind of sustained heat, where plants really start to struggle. They have trouble taking up water. In the night, if it doesn't cool off, they have a real problem with photosynthesis. And that's why you can see a lot of plants die. That's why you see the snapdragons that are really beautiful right now because it's so cool. Well, in a couple of months, when we get up in the 80s, it's just like they burn up and they're gone. Same thing with pansies. So we are in Dallas and Tyler, we're in heat zone 8, and that means we have 90 to 120 days over 86 degrees every year. And if you get a little farther south of us, you get into heat zone 9, and that means you've got 120 to 150 days over 86 degrees. So it just gets worse and worse and worse. And you can see here, these other zone 8 places, like here, they're in like heat zone 4 or 5. So that means they have maybe 35, 45 days over 86 degrees. So it's going to make a big, big difference in what they can plant. But this little handy map did not come out until 2000. And I moved to Texas in 1997. So first I had to go through the summers from hell. And the summers from hell were from 1998 to 2000. And in 1997, we had 56 100-degree days, 35 of which were in a row. Our average high for August was 98 degrees. The average low was 77.4. And we had a whopping 0.3 of 1 inch of rain for the entire month. The next year, we didn't have as many 100-degree days, but August was hotter. So August, the average high was 101.7. The average low was 78.6. We only had a trace of rain, and we had 56 days consecutively without any rain. And then in 2000, we had 45 100-degree days. Our average high was 101.9. The average low was 78.5. And we went 84 days without rain. We went from like July 15th to the beginning of October without any rain. So after that was done, and we were through all those horrible summers, anything that was still alive was my favorite plant. And so here are the things that I really learned when I was in Dallas. I discovered Neil Sperry. I listened to his radio show, which was on a really crummy AM station. I think it still is. Every Saturday that he was on the air for a couple of hours. I took a bunch of adult horticultural courses at SMU, their adult education courses. I took a landscaping course and native plant course and a couple of others. And I also discovered a mail order nursery called High Country Gardens, which was based out of Santa Fe. And they had really water-wise, drought-tolerant plants and plants that really, really liked alkaline soil. So I got a lot of plants from there to plant in my garden. And I learned about a whole bunch of new plants that I had never heard of before when I lived in the this is the Jerusalem sage, which I really like. Its Latin name is Phlomis rusaliana, and it is a really great specimen plant. It blooms like in April or May. I got a Hymenacalis at a plant exchange, and I thought it was like something totally different. I planted it and sort of forgot about it. And the next year when it came up, I was like, whoa, what is this? And had to look it up. But it's become one of my favorite plants. And this is a plant that we sell at our bulb sale every year. I learned about antique roses. I have a friend who lives in Brenham. And so I went down to visit her, and we went to the Antique Rose Emporium. And this is a climbing old blush that I bought there and I brought back to Dallas. And then this is Agastache. This is one of the plants that I bought at High Country Gardens, and hummingbirds really, really like it. And it really, really likes alkaline soil. And it's one of the ones that when I moved to Tyler just said, well, we're not going to be living here anymore. And lastly, these were oxeye daisies that just went crazy, and I really, really liked them. So when I moved to Tyler, that was my last stop. And I was like, well, I think I got this thing lit. However, I learned really quickly there's a totally different soil. The first thing I did when I had first moved here was there were some really ugly red tip petunias in front of my house, which I learned in Dallas to really hate. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go and dig these out, just get rid of them. And so I took my pitchfork and I did just like I did in Dallas. I jumped on it with both feet, and the tines just like went totally down to the bottom, to the soil, to the top of the tines. And I was like, oh my God, and I just fell back on my butt in the middle of the yard. And I was like, ooh, I'm glad it's like early in the morning and the neighbors aren't out. So I learned, well, we got a way different soil. I don't have gumbo clay anymore. I've got sand. And I had a pH test done of my soil, and I was like, oh, my soil's 5.6. So we have like totally different plants here in Tyler, Texas. So what I learned that I really loved in Tyler was Japanese quince. This is the first thing that blooms in the year. It blooms like in late January. Even before I became a master gardener, I went to the Smith County Master Gardener bulb sale, and I got some of these little puppies, these little Byzantine gladiolas. And I was like, oh, these are the most gorgeous things I've ever seen. And I'm glad I got them the first couple of times, before I was a master gardener, because since I've been a master gardener, I've never been able to buy them at the bulb sale because they're gone in about 15 minutes. I also learned about native grasses. This is Gulf Coast muley grass that is just beautiful in the fall when it blooms. And another old garden rose called Mutabilis that blooms really dark pink, and then the blooms turn lighter pink, and then they finally turn yellow. And I just thought that was like just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful flowers. So my advice to you, if and when you move, first of all, learn about your new location. Get some books. Almost every place has location-specific books about how to garden. Take advantage of your extension service and your land-grant university. Your land-grant university here in Texas is Texas A&M. In Illinois, it was University of Illinois. If you're in Michigan, it's Michigan State. Those are the universities that have the ag schools. And usually they have really great websites that are going to tell you not only about plants, they'll tell you about diseases, they'll tell you about insects, and they'll have different learning opportunities for you. While I'm on the extension service, I can't forget the Master Gardeners. There may not be a Master Gardener group in the county that you move to, but there'll probably be a Master Gardener group very close to the county that you live in. I have a friend that just moved to Tennessee, and so as her parting gift, I gave her a piece of paper and I said, okay, here's your last frost date, here's your first frost date. This is your zone, and here's the your website for your Master Gardeners. And also, Professor Google is your friend on the internet. You can learn a whole lot about plants growing in just if you just put into your Google search, plants that grow in, and then name your spot, it'll come up with all sorts of information. Learn to say goodbye to the plants that aren't going to travel. I cannot emphasize that enough. My pet peeve here are people who try and grow peonies. Peonies do not like Tyler, America. The southernmost boundary for peonies is really I-30. Now, as soon as I say that, people go, well, wait, here's my peony, and it's my grandmother grew it, and I just had this discussion with a friend of mine, and she posted the picture, and I was like, oh my God, that plant looks so sad. A peony bush is supposed to be 3.5 to 4 feet tall and about 3 feet wide, and this poor thing was like about a foot tall. And it had this little blossom. It was very sweet, but it's not happy. It's just not happy here. So we have great plants. We have just fabulous plants. We have our Byzantine gladiolas. We have, these daffodils that are naturalized for the South. We have crinums. We have hymenocallis. We can grow camellias. I had never seen a camellia outside a glass house until I moved to Tyler, Texas. So we have so many great plants. Learn to love the plants that like where you're living. Also learn to love a good independent nursery. I know they're a little more expensive, but the people who work at independent nurseries know about plants as opposed to people who work in big box stores. Patronize your local plant sales. You're going to probably get plants that were grown where you're living, and so they're going to be much more happier than things that have been imported from 300 miles away. Use your local resources. We are extremely lucky in Tyler that every week we have a whole page in the Tyler paper for gardening information. So it's Greg's column, it's our Master Gardeners columns, and there's also, I think Neil Sperry's usually in there. And so every week there's like gardening information in the paper. And most importantly, bloom where you're planted. So with that, I'm going to give you just a couple more. We've got some useful information. You might want to take a screenshot of this so you have the URLs. Aggie Horticulture, that's the Texas A&M website. It is a fabulous, fabulous resource for anything. They have fact sheets on everything and anything you can grow in Texas. They also have sections on, vegetable gardening. They have sections on insects. They have sections on plant diseases. It's a really good website. Our Smith County Master Gardener website has an archive of some of our newspaper articles. Plus, if you go into the coming events, you can see everything that's going on in the future here in Tyler. Our Facebook plug for myself, our Smith County Master Gardener Facebook page. We try and post not only things that are going on in Tyler, but I also try and post what's going on in the region, things that our Gregg County Master Gardeners are doing, Dallas, Henderson County, so you can see what's going on in the whole area. And then our help desk, if you have specific questions, you can email our help desk at smithmghelpdesk@gmail.com, and we will try and answer your question. One thing I would ask you to do is, if you have a plant problem, attach some really good high resolution pictures of the problem you're having to your email, and also be real specific about what the problem is, where this plant is located, sun, shade, is it wet, is it dry? So that helps us to be able to answer your questions. And with that, I will turn it over to any questions we might have.
Okay.
What's my favorite thing to grow? I think my favorite things to grow are flowers. I'm not a big vegetable person except for some tomatoes. But I really like the things that grow in the springtime. I love the daffodils, and I love my saucer magnolia, and like my snowball viburnum, and so all the spring plants, and especially after this year, after our winter, it's just like when you saw all these plants starting to bloom and grow again, it just made me happy.
There's another question here. Should I give up on camellias and gardenias?
No, well, gardenias, we may be a little too far north for gardenias, but I don't think camellias. I think this was like a real anomaly, because in fact, some of the, and I think with camellias, in a way, some of it depended on what variety you had.
It did.
Because I think some of the camellias came through fine, and some of the, I'm saying this although I lost my sasanqua, but I'm going to replant a sasanqua. The Indian hawthorns, they're going to be gone, but the sasanqua, I'm going to replant. So I think that depends. I think that depends on the variety of camellia you had.
All right, guys, I think that's it. Hope you have a beautiful weekend, and
Enjoy the rain. Never complain about rain in Texas, ever.
that's true. That's true. Thank you, everybody, for joining.